Jimmy, if you were unable to get into work by normal means, what would be the quirkiest mode of transport that you would take?
I think I would organise for a private helicopter to pick me up, and then I would parachute down from it.
Oh, kind of like James Bond and the Queen in the opening ceremony of the Olympics in 2012.
Very similar to that. Actually, rather than a helicopter, I think I would take a hot air balloon. I think that would be better.
I do quite like that. That's
potentially
more
affordable as well, I'd have thought, and probably less likely to crash. Let's be realistic here.
Is it?
I mean, helicopters crash all the time. Like it's almost a standard rock star death, actually dying in a helicopter crash.
I have a feeling that hot air balloons also crash quite a lot. You have a lot less agency over your movement with a hot air balloon.
That is a downside, I'm not going to lie. I'll look into it and get back to you as to you've got to consider safety in these things. Was there a point to this question?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to talk about the fact that Sir Alex Allen, who is the 69-year-old civil servant who wrote up this report on Priti Patel possibly being a bully to her staff. I just wanted to bring up the fact that he once windsurfed into work again, because I think that just tells you everything you need to know about a man, doesn't it, really?
Can we trust a man who windsails into work?
No, but is he going to be fun at a dinner party? Fuck yeah.
So are we disparaging this report on the basis that the mode of transport of the author is something we disapprove of?
No, entirely opposite. I don't understand how you can think that was my conclusion to this. But if anything that Alex says and we are on first name terms, thank you. I don't even need to call him sir. I will listen to everything he says with bated breath. This is about one of the most powerful people in government, the Home Secretary, being really inappropriate at work. Why is Boris Johnson kind of like nailing his colours to her mast, for want of a better word?
Well, I mean, that sounds a little bit saucy in context.
I mean, I've been watching too much Little Britain, Spitting Image.
Which is actually quite good. I caught a couple of episodes of it last week, and I think they've done a reasonable job despite the scepticism. But that put to one side, I think it's one of the things it kind of reminded me of, because the report does say that Priti Patel used to shout and swear at her staff, and I've sort of got a guilty pleasure in watching old Gordon Ramsay documentaries occasionally. If you remember the Kitchen Nightmares one, where he there's one previous to that called Boiling Point, where he was pursuing his Michelin for his third Michelin star. I don't remember, or first, I can't remember. And it's what made his name, because he was infamous for shouting and swearing at his staff. And there's one episode, if I recall correctly, where a waiter fucks up an order at a table and is just sacked on the spot, basically. And I remember I watched it like a year or two ago, and I thought, there's no way you'd get away with this shit now. Like, it's just way too savage and brutal. And it turns out I was wrong. You can still behave like a total shit. And
yeah, but also there's a difference between a TV show that's there for entertainment and being the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom. So some people may kind of like look at this report and say that it's civil servants being too delicate, too snowflakey, whatever. I know a few people who have actually worked with Priti Patel, and I've known that she is terrible to work for a few years. I think since she's been Home Secretary. No, even longer than that. When she was like in the was it DFID that she was in?
It was DFID before, yeah.
She is renowned by people who work in the civil service to be an absolutely appalling person to work for, and just a bit of a shit. Now, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing if somebody is a bit of a shit at their job, as long as they get shit done. But I think that bullying is kind of like a different level. Like, I don't think people should keep their jobs if they are known to bully and then don't rectify their behaviour. There are like a number of I can't remember the name of the civil servant who kind of like kicked off all of this, who resigned after working with Priti Patel.
Philip Rutnam is the guy you're thinking of.
Thank you.
He's currently suing the Home Office for constructive dismissal.
Yeah, and so he has said that he'd brought up Patel's behaviour multiple times and she hadn't changed it.
This is one of the things that Alex Allen says in the report, though, that she wasn't fully aware of the effect that she was having on staff. Although I find that part of the report just baffling, because if you're giving someone a bollocking, you must know that you'd have to be totally inept not to know what effect that's going to have.
If you are shouting and swearing at people, how can you not? I am sorry, it is 2020. We aren't in like the 1980s when everybody's coked up and earning like millions of pounds a second. That's not what work life is meant to be like anymore. But also, what is the role for bullies in our society, Jimmy? This is kind of like one of the things that I was like curious about. I don't think the public are really going to care about this. And I think there's going to be a certain amount of kind of like snowflakeism in like the press. Like
I'm sure the Telegraph editorial has already been written, if not already published.
All of the kind of like university graduates and fast track civil servants can't handle kind of like a good bollocking by somebody who is assertive and is like a hard nosed boss. But it's really shit being on the receiving end of that, and it's terrible for mental health. And the fact that you can have all of these, like there is this big shift towards kind of like a greater awareness of mental health, especially for like men's mental health in a lot of like right-wing media nowadays. And then on the other, you can say that it's okay to be a bully. Like, I don't understand how they can hold those two things in at the same time. But
well, I mean, apart from anything else, Philip Rutnam, if you've seen a photograph of him, is hardly a spring chicken. I don't think he would qualify as a millennial, although I know a lot of millennials have mortgages and kids now. I don't think he would be bracketed that way. But I mean, as you say, if she was getting results at the Home Office, if people felt it was a well-running department, you might be able to excuse it in a way. And I mean, there is an unfortunate thing in all sorts of organisations where if somebody's talented, they're given a free ride in terms of their personal behaviour. I think the examples of that sort of don't need to be stated. But
are you talking about Steve Jobs?
I mean, Steve Jobs is kind of an interesting example, but I was also thinking of Harvey Weinstein in a sort of wider context.
Oh, that's a lot darker.
It is a lot darker. But I suppose the other thing is that there is a bit of the trouble with, I guess, a lot of this stuff is that there's some people that can take being sworn at and they kind of don't really care, and there's other people who it will affect quite severely. But so I guess there is sort of room for misunderstandings and all that kind of thing. But I've got to think, I mean, the Home Secretary, as you say, is one of the most powerful people in the country. I think you really should have your management chops down by the time you get nominated for a role like that. And I think there's been a lot said about Boris Johnson essentially just picking Brexiteers for his cabinet. That is obviously true, and that's why certain people have been chosen who otherwise might not have been. I've just got to think there's got to be a better way to actually appoint cabinet ministers. It's just in general, I think that is sort of what this shows up most of all.
Well, it's the civil service is meant to kind of like correct for the ineptitude of cabinet ministers, right? Like cabinet ministers are political appointments. They don't actually really have to make stuff happen very much. Like that is the civil service's job, and one of the reasons why the UK is pretty good at getting stuff done. Like in the US, the equivalent of the civil service completely leaves at the end of every administration if it changes parties. And so there isn't kind of like that institutional memory or know-how on how to get stuff done. Whereas in the UK, we don't have that. And there's this kind of like, you basically inherit in perpetuity kind of like a staff every time there's a new person in the post. And the minister is meant to kind of like say, do this, and then they're meant to do it. But I've heard people suggest that it is just because, and I don't know. It's possible that some of this is kind of like based in a bit of sexism. I'm not sure. I unfortunately have not had the privilege of meeting the lady, but she. I've heard people suggest that she's just really, really out of her depth. That she isn't that good, and she's just really incompetent, and then she takes it out on people. But also, we should remember that this is the lady who was who lost her job under David Cameron's premiership.
You're thinking of Theresa when she was working with Theresa.
Oh, was it
May,
Theresa May?
Yeah.
And she had meeting. She didn't disclose meetings that she had when she was, I think, at DFID. She had secret meetings with the Israeli government.
Yep, that is correct.
Which is, again, against the ministerial code.
Yeah, I mean, I think when she was sacked that time, it was sort of assumed that she would wendle her way back into government somehow, and obviously she did do that eventually as the Home Secretary. But yeah, I mean, she has form on this. I mean, she also has form even before the Philip Rutnam case. There was kind of other reports of, I mean, a lot of this stuff was just hearsay, which I'm still going to pass on because why not? About her in kind of previous jobs where it was felt she didn't have a particularly professional, method of conducting herself. The sexism angle is kind of interesting, I think. I mean,
it's what a lot of conservative commentators have actually responded with, saying that a lot of these allegations are based in sexism and racism. And the fact that she isn't from kind of like the kind of background that a lot of, at least the grandees of the civil service are from.
I mean, who knows, really? I've not seen any public information that would verify that one way or the other. It seems to me to be grasping at straws, really. And, even if people don't like her for those sort of reasons, there's still been an independent investigation that has concluded that she's not very pleasant to work for. It seems fairly straightforward to me that is the case.
Why is Boris Johnson keeping her?
I mean, I guess the conventional answer is that he wants to keep hold of Brexiteers in his cabinet. It would also look particularly bad. He's lost his chief advisor last week. Do you really want to lose a Home Secretary? I mean, not even last week, sort of, within the same week practically. Is that something you want to do? You begin to look very, very incompetent he already looks incompetent for various reasons. But
imagine the Prime Minister of Great Britain looking incompetent. Close your eyes, if you will.
I mean, it would be interesting to know in an alternate universe if Dominic Cummings was still in office, whether Priti Patel would have gone. I think it would have been more likely because presumably he would have had a view, and I don't know how tight they are, and also, it would have looked, the situation would have looked a bit different. I don't know. I mean, what's your kind of read on the situation?
I think I probably agree with you in terms of he can't lose his senior advisor and his Home Secretary in 2 weeks. And I would expect there to be a reshuffle in the near future, but now is just not convenient for him, and so he had to go against Sir Alex the Windsurfer's suggestions. And he had to be like, well, I can't do it now, so I'm just going to reject his conclusions. But also, how there's no HR, like where is the HR saying this person needs to be sacked or needs to not have this role?
Well, from what I've read, the Prime Minister is the ultimate arbiter. On whether the code's been broken.
He's the one who decides.
I mean, that's like the chief exec being the head of HR. You've got to have an independent head of HR. What's the point?
Yeah, but this isn't HR. This isn't I hate to break it to you, but this isn't a private corporation.
So what? Do you know what I mean? It's like the shittest answer. I mean, it is sort of fair in a way. Like a lot, I think people. I guess this is sort of getting into the weeds of corporate governance, which is kind of boring at the best of times. But politics in Britain is so unprofessional because it all started like on a handshake 400 years ago or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like it's all, it's so uncodified and so haphazard. We sort of seen the same thing in the kind of parliamentary bullying allegations about, say, John Bercow, the former speaker, and his and staff in the House of Commons. And the process, from what I can tell, just needs to be professionalised in some way. I mean, the ministerial code was...
What do you mean by professionalised?
As in, you need to, like, the PM shouldn't be allowed to mark his own homework if, you know, a report is being filed against his Home Secretary. That should clearly fall under the remit of somebody else who is at least somewhat independent of you know, whoever is Prime Minister at that point. Just basic stuff like that, you know, just separation of powers, checks and balances, all of that sort of thing.
Ken Clarke, the who is the granddad of Ramona's, he was saying that he was like harking back to a time where if this kind of thing had come out in the good old days, then the minister would have fallen on their sword and they would have resigned. What do you think? Why do you think that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore?
I'm not really sure that I buy that. I think actually in some ways processes have been improved since the days of Ken Clarke, who was Chancellor under Margaret Thatcher, among other things. I mean, the ministerial code, I think, was only published under Gordon Brown, so that I mean, who was Prime Minister between 2007 to 2010. That tells you something in and of itself. I mean, I think that, and there's all sorts of. I think if you sort of spoke to somebody who's, say, a civil servant who's been in politics 30, 40 years, I'd be very surprised if they told you things were less professional than they were back under Margaret Thatcher. Maybe they were in certain respects, but I don't really buy it as a whole. But in some ways, I guess, to answer the particulars of the question, this government just doesn't really have any shame. Like it's that whole like. I sort of dislike the general tendency to draw parallels between Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, but there is an attitude that if you just don't give a shit, you can wait out pretty much any complaint and it doesn't really matter. Which is, I mean, I think that is true to some degree. I think that is an identifiable phenomenon.
Yeah. Remember they prorogued Parliament?
Yeah.
Fucking
Crazy.
hell.
Crazy. We should. Is there anything else you wanna touch on? I think the sort of badness of this. We should have found someone who thinks that Priti Patel should stay in office to counterbalance things, but it kind of seems self-evident to me that this is wrong. But
yeah.
What do I know?
Not very much.